Summer 1940. Kaunas, Lithuania. The air carries the scent of pine forests and impending doom. Outside the Japanese consulate, a crowd grows each day, men, women, and children with haunted eyes and worn suitcases, their lives reduced to whatever they could carry when fleeing Poland. They are Jews escaping the Nazi invasion that has swallowed their homeland, and now they face a new reality. The Soviet Union is closing in from the east, and their only hope lies in obtaining transit visas to reach distant shores, particularly Japan. Inside the consulate, Chiune Sugihara, a diplomat of 40 with wire-rimmed glasses and a measured demeanor, stares through the window at the gathering crowd. His fingers trace the edge of the documents on his desk, official papers bearing the imperial seal. In his hand, a fountain pen rests, its silver clip catching the dim light. This pen, this simple instrument of bureaucracy, will soon become the weapon of quiet rebellion that defies an empire and saves thousands of lives. The clock on the wall ticks with relentless precision as Sugihara weighs his options. Telegrams from Tokyo are explicit. Under no circumstances should visas be issued to these refugees. Japan's alliance with Nazi Germany demands compliance. Yet each time Sugihara looks out his window, he sees not statistics or policy violation, but human beings, a mother clutching her infant, an elderly rabbi with trembling hands, teenagers trying to appear brave despite their fear. The contrast between the cold efficiency of his government's orders and the desperate humanity before him creates a tension that will soon reach its breaking point. July 27, 1940. The temperature rises both outside and within Sugihara's conscience. That morning, he makes a decision that will change everything. He picks up his fountain pen, dips it in ink, and begins to write not the routine diplomatic correspondence of his career, but visas that represent life itself. His wife Yukiko watches him, understanding the risks but offering silent support. The first visa is issued, then another and another. The pen moves across paper with purpose, each stroke a small act of defiance against the machinery of death that has begun to roll across Europe. The year 1940 found Europe in chaos. Nazi Germany had invaded Poland in September 1939, unleashing what would become known as the Holocaust. By June 1940, the Nazis had conquered the Low Countries, France, and begun bombing Britain. Eastern Europe became a killing field where Jewish populations faced systematic persecution, deportation, and murder. It was against this backdrop of unprecedented violence that Chiune Sugihara found himself serving as Japan's vice consul in Kaunas, Lithuania, a position that would place him at the crossroads of history. Sugihara was not a typical diplomat. Born in 1900 in rural Japan, he had excelled academically, demonstrating a particular talent for languages. After graduating with honors from Waseda University, he was selected for the diplomatic service and sent to study Russian in Harbin, China. His linguistic abilities eventually earned him a position as an interpreter for the Japanese military. But Sugihara found himself increasingly uncomfortable with Japan's militaristic ambitions. He resigned his military commission in 1934 to return fully to diplomatic service, a decision that reflected his fundamental character, a man guided by principle rather than expediency. In 1939, Sugihara was appointed vice consul to Lithuania, a position that seemed relatively minor in Japan's diplomatic hierarchy. The Japanese government had established a consulate in Kaunas to monitor Soviet and German activities in the Baltic region. Sugihara's primary responsibilities involved gathering intelligence and reporting on political developments. He could not have known that within a year, this posting would present him with a moral challenge that would define his legacy. Lithuania in 1940 was a pressure cooker of geopolitical tension. The country had enjoyed only brief independence since 1918, before falling under Soviet influence in June 1940, when the Red Army occupied the country. As Soviet control tightened, thousands of Polish Jews who had fled to Lithuania seeking refuge now found themselves trapped between two totalitarian regimes, the Nazis to the west and the Soviets to the east. Their situation grew increasingly desperate as rumors of Nazi atrocities filtered through and Soviet repression intensified. Among these refugees was a delegation from Poland that managed to secure an audience with Sugihara in July 1940. Led by Zarach Warheftik, a Polish-Jewish lawyer and future Israeli politician, the group presented their case. They needed transit visas through Japan to reach other destinations, particularly Palestine, Dutch Curaçao, or other territories that might offer asylum. Without these visas, they faced certain death. Sugihara listened intently, his diplomatic training warring with his human compassion. He requested permission from his superiors in Tokyo to issue the visas, emphasizing the humanitarian crisis unfolding before him. The response was swift and unequivocal. The Japanese Japanese government, seeking to maintain good relations with Nazi Germany, refused to authorize the issuance of visas to Jewish refugees. Sugihara was instructed to follow standard procedure, which meant denying nearly all applications. The rejection from Tokyo placed Sugihara in an impossible position. As a career diplomat, he understood the importance of following orders and maintaining diplomatic protocol. Disobeying direct instructions would mean the end of his career and potentially bring disgrace upon his family. Yet as he looked out his window each morning at the growing crowd of refugees, the human cost of compliance became increasingly unbearable. One particular encounter crystallized the dilemma for Sugihara. In late July 1940, a Dutch rabbi named Samuel Shlomo Rosenberg approached the consulate with his family. Rosenberg managed to obtain an entry visa to Curaçao, a Dutch colony in the Caribbean, but needed a transit visa through Japan to reach his destination. When Sugihara explained that he could not issue the visa without authorization from Tokyo, Rosenberg's young daughter began to cry. "Please, mister," she pleaded in broken English. "We don't want to die." The child's words struck Sugihara with profound force. Later that evening, he discussed the situation with his wife Yukiko. "I may have to disobey my government," he told her quietly. Yukiko, who had witnessed the suffering of the refugees firsthand, simply nodded. "Do what you think is right," she replied. This conversation marked a turning point. Sugihara had made his decision, knowing full well the personal and professional consequences. On July 31, 1940, Sugihara began issuing visas without authorization. He and Yukiko worked long hours, often 18 to 20 hours per day, writing visas by hand. Each visa required careful completion: names, destinations, dates of travel, and Sugihara's signature and official seal. The fountain pen became an extension of his will, moving across page after page with determined precision. The line outside the consulate grew longer as word spread that the Japanese vice-consul was issuing visas. Sugihara established a system to manage the crowd, maintaining order while processing as many applications as possible. He issued visas not only to those with proper documentation, but also to many who lacked the required papers, understanding that bureaucratic requirements were meaningless in the face of imminent death. As the weeks passed, Sugihara's actions did not go unnoticed. The Soviet authorities, preparing to annex Lithuania completely, grew suspicious of his activity. The Japanese government continued to send telegrams demanding that he cease issuing visas. Yet Sugihara persisted, finding creative ways to justify his action. He argued that the refugees were merely transiting through Japan and would not remain, and he emphasized the potential economic benefits of allowing refugees to travel through Japanese territory. By late August 1940, the situation became untenable. The Soviet Union ordered all foreign consulates in Lithuania to close by the end of the month. Sugihara received final instructions to leave Kaunas immediately. Even as he prepared to depart, he continued writing visas, working up to the last possible moment. On September 1, 1940, as he boarded the train for Berlin, Sugihara was still signing visas and throwing them from the train window to refugees gathered on the platform. In the approximately 1 month that he issued visas without authorization, Sugihara saved an estimated 6,000 Jewish lives. The exact number remains uncertain, as each visa often covered entire families, and some refugees managed to obtain forged documents based on legitimate visas. What is certain is that Sugihara's actions represented one of the largest rescue efforts of Jews during the Holocaust, accomplished not through military might, but through the simple act of putting pen to paper. The journey east. The visas issued by Chiune Sugihara were not destination documents, but rather transit permits, permission to travel through Japan to another final destination. For the Jewish refugees who received them, these pieces of paper represented a fragile thread of hope connecting Lithuania to safety. The journey that followed would be arduous, uncertain, and for many, life-threatening. Yet the existence of these visas, signed by Sugihara's hand and stamped with the imperial seal, opened a narrow escape route from the Nazi death machine that was consuming Europe. The first challenge for the refugees was transportation from Kaunas to Japan. With most of Europe at war and the Soviet Union controlling much of the territory between Lithuania and the Pacific, the journey required careful planning and considerable resources. The primary route involved traveling by train across the Soviet Union to Vladivostok, then by ship to Japan. This journey covered over 7,000 miles and could take weeks to complete, during which refugees faced numerous obstacles including border controls, bureaucratic hurdles, and the constant threat of being turned back. The Soviet government, though officially allied with Nazi Germany, surprisingly agreed to allow Jewish refugees with Japanese visas to transit through Soviet territory. This decision was likely motivated by a combination of factors. The Soviets had not yet turned against the Jews with the same intensity as the Nazis, and they may have seen some strategic or economic benefit in allowing the refugees to pass. Additionally, the Japanese government, despite its prohibition on issuing visas, had instructed its diplomats not to interfere with refugees who already possessed valid documents. This created a narrow window of opportunity that Sugihara's refugees exploited. In August and September 1940, groups of refugees began making their way from Kaunas to Moscow, then onward to Vladivostok. The train journey across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union was an experience in itself. For many urban Polish Jews, the sight of the Russian countryside, its endless forests, small villages, and diverse population was both fascinating and intimidating. The refugees traveled in crowded third-class compartments, sharing meager food and stories of their past lives and uncertain futures. One refugee, a young man named Leo Hannon, later recalled the journey. "We were packed like sardines in these train cars. The conditions were terrible, but nobody complained. We had the visas that was our ticket to life. Every time the train stopped and officials came to check documents, our hearts stopped. But when they saw Sugihara's signature and that seal, they just nodded and moved on." The refugees' arrival in Vladivostok marked another critical phase of their journey. This port city on the Pacific Ocean was a melting pot of cultures. Russian, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese influences all converged in this strategic location. For the Jewish refugees who had spent their lives in Europe, the sight of Asian faces, architecture, and customs was both disorienting and intriguing. From Vladivostok, the refugees boarded ships bound for Japan. The primary destination was the port of Tsuruga on Japan's western coast. The sea journey could take anywhere from 3 to 5 days, depending on weather conditions. During this time, the refugees remained in a state of limbo, technically free from Nazi persecution, but still far from safety, their fate dependent on the goodwill of nations and individuals they had never met. The arrival of Jewish refugees in Japan beginning in late 1940 presented Japanese authorities with a complex dilemma. On one hand, Japan was allied with Nazi Germany and had adopted many of the anti-Jewish policies prevalent in Europe at the time. On the other hand, the refugees possessed valid transit visas issued by a Japanese diplomat, and Japan had not yet implemented the extreme measures against Jews that characterized Nazi policy. The Japanese government's response was ambivalent. While some officials advocated for restricting Jewish immigration or expelling the refugees, others argued for a more moderate approach. This debate was influenced by several factors, including Japan's relationship with the United States, where many American Jews held significant economic and political influence, the potential economic benefits of Jewish expertise, and a small but influential group of Japanese officials who believed in a policy known as the Jewish Experts Plan, the idea that Japan could benefit from Jewish financial and technical expertise while avoiding the extreme anti-Semitism of their German ally. The refugees were initially housed in a small number of facilities in Kobe, a port city near Osaka. The local Jewish community, though small, provided assistance with housing, food, and navigation of Japanese bureaucracy. Among the refugees were teachers, doctors, lawyers, artists, and religious leaders, a cross-section of Jewish society that had been uprooted from their homes and now sought to rebuild their lives in unfamiliar surroundings. Life in Kobe was marked by uncertainty. The refugees were required to report regularly to Japanese authorities and were not permitted to work without special permission. Yet compared to the horrors they had escaped, life in Japan was relatively safe. Children attended schools, adults formed cultural and religious organizations, and the community began to establish the routines of normal life despite their temporary status. Among the refugees was the entire Mir Yeshiva, one of Europe's most prestigious Jewish religious academies. The yeshiva's students and teachers had managed to obtain visas from Sugihara and traveled together from Lithuania to Japan. In Kobe, they re-established their studies, continuing a tradition of Jewish learning that dated back centuries. The presence of the yeshiva in Japan created a unique cultural exchange. Japanese neighbors observed Jewish religious practices with curiosity, while the refugees sought to understand Japanese customs and tradition. The relative safety of the refugees in Japan was shattered in December 1941 with the attack on Pearl Harbor and Japan's entry into World War II. The Japanese government, now fully committed to its alliance with Nazi Germany, viewed the Jewish refugees with increased suspicion. In early 1942, all refugees without third country destinations were relocated to the Shanghai Ghetto, a designated area in Japanese-occupied occupied China, where they would spend the remainder of the war under harsh conditions but, for the most part, safe from Nazi extermination. The journey from Lithuania to Japan and beyond represents a remarkable chapter in Holocaust history. It was made possible by the courage of one diplomat who chose conscience over career, by the resilience of refugees who refused to be crushed by despair, and by the complex geopolitical realities of a world at war. The visas issued by Chiune Sugihara were more than just travel documents. They were lifelines that connected thousands of Jews to safety when all other doors had closed. The price of conscience. The story of Chiune Sugihara's heroic actions does not end with his departure from Kaunas in September 1940. Like many who have chosen principle over expediency, Sugihara faced significant personal and professional consequences for his decision to defy his government's orders. The price of his conscience would be paid over many years, yet he rarely expressed regret for the choice that defined both his career and his character. Upon leaving Lithuania, Sugihara was reassigned to various diplomatic posts in Eastern Europe. His superiors in Tokyo were aware that he had issued visas without authorization, but initially, no formal action was taken against him. This relative leniency may have been due to the complex diplomatic situation in which Japan found itself still maintaining its alliance with Nazi Germany, while also navigating relationships with other powers. Sugihara's linguistic skills and knowledge of Russian remained valuable assets to the Japanese Foreign Ministry. In 1941, as Japan's relations with the United States deteriorated and the country moved closer to war with the Allies, Sugihara was stationed in Königsberg, Germany. From this vantage point, he witnessed the Nazi regime's increasing persecution of Jews firsthand. The contrast between the horrors unfolding around him and the lives he had saved must have been stark, a constant reminder of both the necessity and the cost of his actions in Kaunas. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and subsequent entry into World War II on the side of the Axis powers changed everything for Sugihara. With Japan now fully committed to its alliance with Nazi Germany, there was no longer any tolerance for diplomats who had assisted Jews in escaping Nazi-controlled territories. In 1942, Sugihara was recalled to Japan and dismissed from the diplomatic service. The official reason given was downsizing in the foreign ministry, but both Sugihara and his superiors understood the true cause of his dismissal. The end of Sugihara's diplomatic career marked the beginning of a difficult period for him and his family. Without a position or pension, Sugihara struggled to find employment in wartime Japan. He worked a series of menial jobs, including translator and part-time teacher, to support his wife and children. The family lived in modest circumstances, a stark contrast to the relative comfort they had enjoyed during Sugihara's diplomatic career. Throughout these difficult years, Sugihara rarely spoke about his actions in Lithuania. He did not seek recognition or praise for what he had done, nor did he express bitterness about the consequences he faced. This reticence was characteristic of Japanese cultural values, which emphasize humility and the fulfillment of duty without expectation of reward. It also reflected Sugihara's personal character, a man who acted according to his conscience not for acclaim, but because it was the right thing to do. The end of World War II in 1945 brought new challenges for Japan and for the Sugihara family. The country was devastated by defeat, occupation, and economic collapse. Sugihara, like many former government officials, found himself under scrutiny by the Allied occupation authorities. His association with the wartime government and service in Germany made him a subject of investigation, though his actions on behalf of Jewish refugees were largely unknown at the time. In 1947, Sugihara's wife Yukiko returned to Japan from a visit to relatives, bringing with her a letter from a Jewish refugee who had been saved by Sugihara's visas. The letter expressed gratitude for Sugihara's actions and inquired about his well-being. This letter seems to have been the first indication Sugihara received that his actions in Lithuania had indeed made a difference, that the people he had helped had survived the war and remembered him with gratitude. Despite this small connection to his past, Sugihara remained largely unknown in the immediate post-war years. He continued to work various jobs to support his family, including a position as a manager for a trading company. The family's financial situation remained precarious, and Sugihara's health began to decline under the stress of years of hard work and uncertainty. It was not until the 1960s that Sugihara's story began to emerge from obscurity. In 1968, Joshua Nishri, the economic attaché at the Israeli embassy in Tokyo, and a man who had received one of Sugihara's visas as a teenager, tracked down the former diplomat. Nishri had spent years searching for the man who saved his life, and their emotional reunion was the beginning of Sugihara's recognition as a righteous among among the nation, an honorific used by the State of Israel to describe non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. In 1969, Sugihara was invited to Israel, where he was warmly received by the government and many of the people he had saved. At a ceremony in Jerusalem, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, one of Israel's highest decorations for non-citizens. When asked about his actions in Lithuania nearly 3 decades earlier, Sugihara replied simply, "I did what was right. I followed my conscience." This recognition in Israel marked the beginning of a reassessment of Sugihara's legacy in Japan as well. In 1975, the Japanese government partially restored his pension, acknowledging his service to the country. However, full rehabilitation would not come until after his death. Sugihara passed away on July 31, 1986, exactly 46 years after he had begun issuing visas in Kaunas. At the time of his death, he remained relatively unknown in his home country, despite international recognition of his heroic actions. The years following Sugihara's death have seen a gradual recognition of his heroism in Japan. In 1991, the Foreign Ministry officially apologized for his dismissal and acknowledged that his actions in Lithuania were consistent with humanitarian principles. In 2000, on the centenary of his birth, Sugihara was honored with a commemorative stamp and a memorial in his hometown of Yatsu. Today, he is celebrated in Japan as a model of moral courage and humanitarian action. The story of Chiune Sugihara's life after Kaunas is as instructive as his heroic actions themselves. It demonstrates that moral courage often comes at a significant personal cost, and that recognition of such courage may be long delayed. Yet Sugihara's example also shows that acting according to conscience is its own reward, a principle that guided him through years of hardship and obscurity without diminishing his commitment to doing what was right. The ripple effect, the true measure of Chiune Sugihara's actions, extends far beyond the thousands of lives saved directly through his visa. Like a stone cast into a pond, his courageous decision created ripples that continue to spread through time, touching countless lives and shaping our understanding of moral responsibility in the face of injustice. The impact of Sugihara's heroism can be measured not only in lives saved, but in families rebuilt, contributions made to society, and lessons passed down through generations. The refugees who escaped with Sugihara's visas established new lives around the world. Many settled in Palestine, which would become Israel in 1948, while others made their way to the United States, Canada, Australia, and various countries in South America. Wherever they settled, they brought with them not only the trauma of survival, but also the resilience and determination to rebuild. The children and grandchildren of these refugees have gone on to become scientists, artists, teachers, business leaders, and contributors to every field of human endeavor. One notable example is the story of the Mir Yeshiva, which was saved in its entirety by Sugihara's visas. After leaving Japan, the yeshiva eventually re-established itself in Shanghai, where it continued its religious studies throughout the war. In 1947, the yeshiva moved to Jerusalem, where it remains one of the world's preeminent centers of Jewish religious learning. The survival of this institution, which had existed for over a century before the Holocaust, represents not only the preservation of religious tradition, but also the continuity of a cultural heritage that might otherwise have been lost. The personal stories of those saved by Sugihara provide the most compelling evidence of his impact. Among the refugees was Zarach Warheftig, the Polish Jewish lawyer who had first approached Sugihara on behalf of the refugees. Warheftig went on to become one of the signers of Israel's Declaration of Independence and served as a minister in the Israeli government for many years. His contributions to the establishment and development of the State of Israel were significant, and they were made possible by the transit visa issued by a Japanese diplomat in Lithuania. Another refugee, a young man named Leo Hannon, eventually settled in the United States, where he became a successful engineer and raised a family. Hannon never forgot Sugihara's act of courage, and in his later years, he dedicated himself to ensuring that the story of the Japanese Skindler was not forgotten. He traveled extensively, speaking about his experiences and meeting with Sugihara's family members. Hannon's efforts, along with those of other survivors, played a crucial role in bringing Sugihara's story to a wider audience. The impact of Sugihara's actions extends beyond the Jewish community. His story has become a touchstone for discussions of moral courage and humanitarian intervention in the face of genocide and mass atrocity. Educators use Sugihara's example to teach students about the importance of individual action and the power of conscience. His story challenges the notion that individuals are powerless in the face of systemic evil, demonstrating instead instead that even small acts of defiance can have profound consequences. In Japan, Sugihara's legacy has contributed to a broader conversation about the country's role during World War II. While Japan has not faced the same level of historical reckoning as Germany regarding its actions during the war, Sugihara's story provides an example of Japanese humanity and moral courage during a dark period. His recognition in Japan has helped create space for more nuanced discussions of the war years and the various ways Japanese individuals responded to the challenges of that time. The Sugihara House in Kaunas, now a museum, stands as a physical testament to his legacy. The building where Sugihara issued the visas has been preserved and transformed into an educational center that welcomes visitors from around the world. Inside, exhibits detail the history of the Holocaust in Lithuania, Sugihara's life and career, and the stories of the refugees he saved. The museum serves not only as a memorial to the past, but also as a reminder of the ongoing importance of moral courage in the face of injustice. In 2019, the city of Kaunas unveiled a monument to Sugihara near the former consulate. The sculpture depicts the diplomat handing a visa to a refugee, capturing the moment of hope and humanity that defined his actions in Lithuania. The monument stands as a permanent reminder of what one person of conscience can achieve, even in the darkest of times. The recognition of Sugihara's heroism has not been limited to Lithuania and Japan. In 1985, the State of Israel honored Sugihara as one of the righteous among the nations, a designation reserved for non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. A tree was planted in his honor on the Avenue of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, Israel's memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. This recognition represents the Jewish people's eternal gratitude to those who stood with them during their darkest hour. Sugihara's story has also been told through various media, including books, documentaries, and feature film. The 2000 Japanese film, Sugihara Chiune, Visas for Life, brought his story to a wide audience in Japan, while the 2015 documentary Sugihara, Conspiracy of Kindness, introduced him to international viewers. These works ensure that Sugihara's legacy continues to inspire new generations, encouraging reflection on the moral choices we all face in our lives. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Sugihara's legacy is the way it challenges us to consider our own capacity for moral courage. His story asks difficult questions. What would we do if faced with a similar choice between following orders and following our conscience? What risks would we be willing to take to help others in need? How might our small acts of courage create ripples that extend far beyond what we can immediately see? The answers to these questions are deeply personal, but Sugihara's example provides a guiding light. His life demonstrates that moral courage is not the exclusive domain of saints and heroes, but is available to all of us, regardless of our position or circumstances. In a world still grappling with genocide, ethnic cleansing, and mass displacement, Sugihara's story remains as relevant as ever, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of human compassion can still shine through. The man behind the legend. To truly understand Chiune Sugihara's extraordinary actions in Lithuania, we must look beyond the legend to the man himself, his character, his values, and the experiences that shaped him. Sugihara was not born a hero. He became one through a series of choices that reflected his fundamental humanity and moral clarity. By examining the person behind the legend, we gain insight into how ordinary individuals are capable of extraordinary courage when faced with profound moral challenges. Chiune Sugihara was born on January 1, 1900 in Ieyasu, a small town in Gifu Prefecture, Japan. He was the eldest son of a middle-class family, and from an early age, he demonstrated exceptional intelligence and a capacity for hard work. His father, Yoshimizu Sugihara, was a local tax official who instilled in his son the values of duty, discipline, and service to others, values that would guide Sugihara throughout his life. As a young man, Sugihara excelled academically, showing particular talent for languages. After graduating from high school with top honors, he won a scholarship to Waseda University in Tokyo, one of Japan's most prestigious institutions. At Waseda, he majored in English literature and political science, immersing himself in a curriculum that exposed him to Western philosophy, literature, and political thought. This education would later prove invaluable in his diplomatic career and in his ability to see beyond the narrow nationalism that characterized much of Japanese policy during the war years. Sugihara's linguistic abilities caught the attention of the Japanese Foreign Ministry, which recruited him while he was still a university student. After graduating in 1919, he entered the diplomatic service and was sent to Harbin, China, to study Russian and Manchu. This posting to Manchuria would prove formative for Sugihara, exposing him to the complexities of Japanese imperialism imperialism and the diverse cultures of East Asia. During his time in Harbin, Sugihara became fluent in Russian and German. In addition to the English he had learned at university, he also converted to Russian Orthodoxy and married a Russian woman, though this marriage would later end in divorce. These experiences suggest a man who was open to other cultures and willing to step outside the rigid boundaries of Japanese nationalism, qualities that would later inform his decision to help Jewish refugees in Lithuania. In 1932, Sugihara's career took a significant turn when he was appointed vice director of the Foreign Ministry's Bureau of Manchurian Affairs. This position placed him at the center of Japan's imperial ambitions in China, and he quickly became disillusioned with the militaristic policies he was expected to implement. In 1934, he made the difficult decision to resign from his post in protest against Japan's treatment of the Chinese people. This act of conscience, though less dramatic than his later actions in Lithuania, revealed a pattern of moral courage that would define his life. After leaving the Bureau of Manchurian Affairs, Sugihara's diplomatic career entered a period of uncertainty. He was eventually reassigned to various posts, including a position as a translator in the Japanese delegation to the Soviet Union. It was during this time that he met Yukiko Kikuchi, a Japanese woman working in Moscow. The two married in 1935, and Yukiko would become Sugihara's lifelong partner and supporter, sharing in both the hardships and the moral choices that lay ahead. In 1938, Sugihara was appointed vice consul to Finland, and in 1939, he was transferred to Lithuania to serve as vice consul in Kaunas. These postings were relatively minor in the hierarchy of the Japanese diplomatic service, suggesting that Sugihara's earlier resignation had not been forgotten by his superiors. Yet it was precisely in this seemingly insignificant position that Sugihara would face the moral challenge that would define his legacy. Those who knew Sugihara during this time describe him as a quiet, dignified man with a reserved demeanor. He was not given to grand gestures or dramatic speeches. Instead, he expressed his values through his action. His colleagues noted his intelligence, his linguistic abilities, and his commitment to doing his job with integrity. Yet beneath this reserved exterior was a man of deep feeling and strong moral convictions, qualities that would emerge dramatically in the summer of 1940. Sugihara's decision to issue visas to Jewish refugees was not made lightly. He was a career diplomat who understood the importance of following orders and maintaining diplomatic protocol. He also knew that defying his government's instructions would mean the end of his career and potential hardship for his family. Yet after careful consideration and consultation with his wife Yukiko, he concluded that he had no choice but to follow his conscience. The character traits that enabled Sugihara to make this decision were evident throughout his life. He was a man of principle who valued human dignity above bureaucratic rules. He was capable of independent thought, willing to question authority when he believed it to be wrong. He was also a pragmatist who understood that moral convictions must be accompanied by concrete action. These qualities, combined with his linguistic abilities and diplomatic experience, made him uniquely positioned to help the Jewish refugees in Lithuania. Sugihara's relationship with his wife Yukiko was crucial to his ability to act on his conviction. Yukiko was not merely a supportive spouse, but an active participant in the decision to issue visas. She helped with the paperwork, managed the consulate, and provided emotional support during the stressful weeks in Kaunas. Later, during the difficult years following Sugihara's dismissal from the diplomatic service, she stood by him, sharing in the hardships without complaint. Their partnership demonstrates how moral courage is often sustained by the support of others who share our values. After the war, Sugihara lived a quiet life, working various jobs to support his family. He rarely spoke about his actions in Lithuania, not out of regret but out of humility. He did not seek recognition or praise for what he had done, believing that he had simply done what was right. This humility was perhaps his most remarkable quality, the ability to perform extraordinary acts of courage without feeling the need for acknowledgement or reward. In his later years, as his story became more widely known, Sugihara was sometimes asked why he had risked so much to help strangers. His response was typically simple and direct. They were human beings, and they needed help. This statement encapsulates the essence of Sugihara's character, a man who saw beyond nationality, religion, and politics to recognize our common humanity. Chiune Sugihara died on July 31, 1986, at the age of 86. At the time of his death, he was still relatively unknown in Japan, though his story was beginning to gain international recognition. In the years since, his reputation has grown, and he is now celebrated as one of Japan's greatest heroes of the 20th century. Yet this posthumous fame would likely have mattered little to Sugihara himself, who was motivated not by the desire desire for recognition, but by the simple conviction that helping others in need is the right thing to do. The man behind the legend was not a superhero or a saint, but an ordinary human being who made an extraordinary choice when faced with a moral crisis. His story reminds us that heroism is not about being without fear or doubt, but about acting with courage despite them. It is about recognizing our common humanity and taking responsibility for one another, even when it is difficult or dangerous to do so. In a world still grappling with injustice and inhumanity, Chiune Sugihara's example remains as relevant as ever, a testament to the power of individual conscience and the enduring impact of moral courage. Section Conclusion Epilogue. The pen that wrote life. The story of Chiune Sugihara challenges us to consider the profound impact of individual choices in moments of moral crisis. In a world where bureaucratic systems often seem impersonal and overwhelming, Sugihara demonstrated that even the smallest acts of conscience can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can immediately see. His fountain pen, once a simple tool of diplomatic procedure, became an instrument of salvation that defied an empire and saved thousands of lives. Sugihara's legacy transcends the specific historical circumstances of World War II. It speaks to universal questions about our responsibility to others, the power of moral courage, and the capacity of ordinary individuals to resist injustice. In an era still marked by genocide, ethnic cleansing, and mass displacement, his example remains a beacon of hope and a challenge to our collective conscience. The refugees saved by Sugihara's visas went on to rebuild their lives around the world, contributing to society in countless ways. Their children and grandchildren continue to benefit from the choice made by a Japanese diplomat in Lithuania nearly a century ago. This multi-generational impact reminds us that our actions today can shape the future in ways we cannot fully anticipate. Sugihara's story also invites us to reflect on the nature of heroism. He was not a warrior or a revolutionary, but a diplomat who used the tools of his trade, paper, ink, and a seal to save lives. His heroism was quiet, methodical, and profoundly human. It suggests that heroism is not about extraordinary abilities, but about making extraordinary choices with the resources we have. In the end, Chiune Sugihara's life teaches us that conscience is the most powerful force for good in the world. When we choose to act according to our deepest moral convictions, even at great personal cost, we become part of something larger than ourselves. We become, like Sugihara, writers of life in a world too often filled with death. The end story.